respect, Senator, if we are trying to destroy public education, then this is a death by 1,000 cuts kind of approach, because, again, I have the data right here. There's not been a single year that public education's budget has been cut, except for 2009, 2010. We had a 1.3% cut. And that equals to about $13 million. Now, as my cohort, Mr. Gessing, mentioned, there's a lot of federal money that also goes into education. And so what they've typically done, and we're doing that this year as well, is to try to balance out where we have federal money coming in, and in those years we had stimulus money coming in, and we try to balance that off with what we get from the federal funding. And so I bet if I had the overall funding, again, the funding for education has not gone down. Now, I can only speak specifically for the Albuquerque Public Schools because that's where my district is. And if you're here to tell me that there's no fat to cut in education, then I'm just going to have to vehemently disagree with you. We've seen a lot of the stories in the newspaper and on the television shows with regard to APS. They spend $500,000 a year on public relations. They have a PIO who makes over $100,000 a year. They have lobbyists. Now, somebody explain this to me. You have a government agency that has a lobbyist that then lobbies other parts of the government for funding for that government agency. Does that make any sense at all? There's a lot that we can do to cut. Specifically, and again, I don't want to start a fight with Carter. He was actually very nice to me the other day. I had a bill before the Labor Committee that was aimed at reducing the ability of state employees to cash out their sick time when they leave the employment with the state or when they retire. And this was a bill that would have saved the state $1.5 million, and Carter was nice enough not to come and speak eloquently against my bill, but he had a couple of guys there. But this would have saved the state $1.5 million a year. Now, one of the concerns that I have is that when we talk about public employee compensation, we need to make sure that the compensation is not out of bounds with what we have in the private sector. Now, if you look at wages, it really depends on the profession. There are some professions where public sector employees make a lot less than what they would in the private sector. But if you actually average it, most public employees make slightly more than their private sector counterparts. The problem is when you look at the benefits. That is where the largest difference occurs. It comes with retirement, it comes with employee health care benefits. 90% of private sector employees cannot cash out their sick time when they leave employment with their employer. We need to make sure that our private sector employees and our public sector employees are being compensated evenly. Otherwise, we wind up with these very bad pension systems, and Paul and I were talking about this previously. I think we're third in the nation in terms of our unfunded liabilities for our pensions. A lot of the problem with our public sector employee compensation is that it's backloaded. In other words, we put all these things when they retire or when they leave employment. I want to make sure that we front load that compensation so that we know from the get-go how much are we compensating these employees. It makes it much easier to budget. It makes it much easier for us to forecast what our spending is going to be. So there's a lot of fat that we can cut, and I think if we take that approach of trying to make sure that our public sector employees are paid commensurately, both in pay and in benefits, more similar to the private sector, and that includes everything. That includes retirement, that includes health care. I think that we can cut a lot of the fat out of our budget.